This story happened in the land of the rising sun, Japan in 1984. The story is intricate, strange, at times resembling a farce, and at times even somewhat amusing. But overall, of course, it is tragic. No one will die in it. But that doesn't make it any less heinous. People and huge corporations will suffer. And most importantly, it will remain unclear what motivated the criminals, what their plan was, and what ultimate goal their abominable actions served. Because to this day, neither the masterminds nor the perpetrators of this terror have been found. Moreover, I would even hesitate to call this case a specific word that denotes the crime itself. It was not murder because no one died, but the criminals threatened to take many lives. It was not robbery because nothing was stolen, but these actions themselves led to catastrophic material losses. It was not a scam because there were no agreements and arrangements, and therefore it cannot be called a shady deal, but there was a sea of deception and an ocean of lies. And the funniest part is that two Japanese confectionery giants, Ezaki Glico and Morinaga Company, were involved in all of this. It is not even known how many perpetrators were involved in this. Some believe that it was a group of 21 people, while others believe that it was all the work of one evil genius. But this story is called the 21 Creature Monster, whether it hints that there were 21 participants in the criminal group, or one presumptuous personality saw in oneself such a huge, multi-sided nature. That's what the criminals called themselves, so we'll call them that too. The story we're about to tell began with the abduction of Mr. Katsuhisa Ezaki, the president of Ezaki Glico, a descendant of its founder, by unknown individuals. At around 9 p.m. on March 18, 1984, two masked and black-hatted individuals, armed with a pistol and rifle, burst into the home of Katsuhisa Ezaki. Interestingly, Ezaki's house was located in the very center of the city, directly opposite the town hall, where security was constantly patrolling, but this apparently did not scare off the criminals. The illegal intrusion by the unknown individuals into the house was preceded by their preliminary intrusion into the home of Ezaki's elderly parents, where, under the threat of murder, they tied up his 70-year-old mother and forced her to give them the key to her son's back door. Upon entering Katsuhisa's house, they also tied up his 35-year-old wife and 7-year-old daughter, who were peacefully watching television in the living room at the time of the invasion. Believing that these unknown individuals were simply robbers, Ezaki's wife, in an attempt to prevent the worst, tried to negotiate with the robbers, offering huge sums of money for her freedom and the safety of her family. But her proposal was rudely and categorically rejected. Slashing the telephone wires, the criminals broke into the bathroom where Ezaki was hiding at the time, saving two more children, an 11-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. Katsuhisa panicked and began to cry out for help, but he was knocked down with a powerful professional blow. Then they tied up Katsuhisa, and practically naked because he was taking a bath at the time of the invasion, shoved him into a red car where a third criminal was behind the wheel. Throwing some kind of blanket on him, the car roared off, carrying the president of the confectionery corporation in an unknown direction. The news of the kidnapping of such an influential person instantly spread throughout the capital. Since World War II, Japan had not experienced such a heinous act, and the public erupted in outrage. By 10:30 p.m., about 100 journalists from various television stations and newspapers had gathered outside the wealthy man's home. Osaka held its breath in anticipation of a ransom demand, and the kidnappers did not keep themselves waiting for long. At 1:15 on March 19th, the director of the Takatsuki branch of the Izaki Glico Corporation, receives a phone call with a muted voice informing him of a note left in one of the phone booths. The note contains demands and conditions for the ransom of the president of the Confectionery Corporation. In particular, the kidnappers demanded 1 billion yen and 100 bars of gold from the company. This ransom seemed like sheer mockery, considering that in 1984, despite being a rich and prosperous company, the value of Izaki Glico was only 300 million yen. It was obvious to everyone that such a ransom was impossible to pay. The kidnappers could not have been unaware of this fact. Sad conclusions suggested that either the ransom was requested to divert attention and buy time, or it was a cruel joke by an absolutely abnormal person, and the president of the Confectionery Corporation was in mortal danger. Meanwhile, Katsuhisa Izaki was brought to an abandoned warehouse located somewhere on the coast near Miyajima Island, an island in the Seto Inland Sea of Japan, located near Hiroshima. The warehouse was filled with sandbags, which are used to protect against floods. It was obvious that the warehouse was used to store equipment used to fight against water disasters. Izaki was roughly tied up and thrown onto the sandbags. He tried to understand where he was and desperately thought of a way to escape. He realized that he had to pay attention to every detail and remember everything that was happening. But the only thing that was obvious now was that the place was deserted. There were no buildings nearby, and calling for help was useless, so he had to rely only on himself. Then he tried to find out the reason for his kidnapping, but his captors were reluctant to talk to him, answering only with broken phrases through their teeth and making mocking jokes and insults. Sometimes they whispered among themselves, laughing loudly on purpose, but no matter how hard Izaki listened, he couldn't make out the topics of their conversations. All three kidnappers were Japanese. They did not remove their masks in front of Izaki, wore white cotton gloves, and did not address each other by name or nickname. It was evident that these guys were either professionals or extremely well prepared. Periodically, the kidnappers visited their captive, feeding him only bread and dry biscuits and bringing only canned juices to drink. They warned that they would kill him easily if he attempted to escape. 2 days passed this way. On the third day, having been left alone once again, Katsuhisa made the brave decision to try to escape. After spending several hours in desperate attempts to free himself from the ropes, he finally succeeded. Then he found some kind of tool and unscrewed the bolts from the locked door. On March 21, at 2:15 p.m., he was discovered wandering along the tracks of the Japan National Railway near the Osaka Kakomotsu Tamanaru station in Osaka Prefecture. He was staggering and barely moving his bare feet, as if drunk. Izaki was partially undressed, wearing only wet, torn pants with pieces of rope hanging from his hands. He was exhausted, hungry, and beaten. But most importantly, he was unharmed. However, the terror against him continued on April 2. He received a letter with a cassette tape inside. After listening to the tape, Izaki realized with horror that he was hearing the voice of one of his kidnappers. The voice threatened to disable one of the most important production units at Izaki Glico by using hydrochloric acid and demanded an ultimatum of 60 million yen. The recording contained instructions that Izaki had to confirm his agreement to pay by publishing an announcement in the newspaper before Saturday, April 6. Then he had to bring the specified amount of money to a roadside cafe located near the town of Kumano to the pizza restaurant Mamaya on Sunday. It was in this audio message that the criminals first called themselves the 21-faced monster. After consulting, the Osaka police decided not to react to this threat, and Izaki did not respond to the letter. Obviously not having received confirmation from the newspaper, they realized that they were not being negotiated with and began to develop a plan of retaliatory terrorist action. On April 10th, they carried out their first attack. Around 8:00 p.m., There was an explosion in one of the engineering rooms of the central office of Azaki Glico in Osaka. Fortunately, apart from material losses and shock, this explosion did not claim any human lives. On that day, some employees stayed late at work. After finishing their shift and changing in the locker room, they closed the room behind them, not knowing that just 20 minutes after they left, an explosion would blow up the wall of the locker room, which would be completely burned down. Experts who arrived at the scene of the fire will confirm with complete certainty that it was an intentional arson. However, it will never be possible to establish who brought the explosives into the room. At the very moment when firefighters were fighting the fiery beast at the central production facility of the corporation, another office of the company would also be attacked. Around 9:20 p.m. on the same April 10, in the southern part of the city, in the Yodogawa district, a second fire would break out at another Azaki Glico office. One of the parked work minivans in the garage would catch fire. The fire was so intense that only a metal frame remained of the vehicle, so experts had no hope for clues and evidence. The further actions of the criminals amazed with their inventiveness, imagination, and method of implementation. They acted lightning, fast, boldly, and where they were least expected. On April 16, at one of the production loading lines of the company in the town of Ibaraki, Osaka Prefecture, a worker notices a plastic container that is moving slowly towards the mixing tank for candy production. Such a container clearly did not belong here. It was out of place and the worker suspected something was wrong. Removing it from the line, he discovers a threatening note. After calling the police and experts, it turns out that the container was filled with hydrochloric acid. It is noteworthy that from this note, the criminals will stop expressing their demand for money from Azaki Glico. Now their messages will only contain mocking statements towards the company and the police, and of course, threats. On May 10, one of the most devastating blows was dealt to the sweet giant by the 21-faced monster. A letter was sent written in a taunting and mocking manner. The letter stated that a certain portion of the company's candy products had been purchased by the monster and poisoned with sodium cyanide. At the insistence of the police and city authorities, all of the company's products had to be seized from stores. The losses were colossal. This threat cost Azaki Glico a loss of $21 million. It was impossible to keep such a thing hidden from the public. Panic broke out in Japan. No one wanted to buy Azaki Glico products anymore, fearing them like fire. The company suspended its operations and there were widespread layoffs, with almost 500 innocent people becoming unemployed overnight. All the confiscated products were, of course, checked at great expense, but not a single poisoned candy was found. The monster's threat remained unfulfilled, but the results it produced were staggering. Up until the beginning of summer, the criminals bombarded the corporation and the police with letters. They taunted and mocked without restraint, but they did not mention money again, as if they had already received pleasure from the financial ruin of the giant. And they did not commit any further harmful actions. Then, on June 26, they suddenly sent a letter with just one sentence. "We forgive Glico. From then on, the monster will leave Azaki Glico alone, but it will not disappear. It will choose its next victim, no less famous, large, and wealthy." This will begin the stage of tormenting Morinaga Company. Limited, this other Japanese company, also specialized in producing food products, but not candy, but rather fish and meat products. The Marudai Company was also rich and prosperous. Established in 1958, its main office was located in the city of Takatsuki in Osaka Prefecture. The monster's threat contained instructions to the company owner to prepare a sum of 50 million yen by 6:00 p.m. on June 28, 1984, or, as stated in the letter, "You will feel the same as Glico." The the name of the 21st monster already instilled fear. The criminals' actions were so well planned and had such a nationwide impact that the police were determined to take them seriously this time, developing a clever plan to combat the elusive extortionists. The monster's threats were real, and they skillfully put their fears into action, so it was decided to catch the criminals on the hook. By 6 p.m., the cash was prepared, and the head of Marudai, surrounded by police officers, awaited a phone call in his home, cursing the day and hour when the monster decided to turn his gaze on his company. However, the call from the extortionists came not at the appointed time, but only 2 hours later, at 8:03 p.m. As in previous cases, an unknown person over the phone played a recording of a female voice, giving instructions on exactly how the money should be transferred. The voice of the unknown woman curtly stated that the main instructions for the cash transfer could be found on the back of a street stand with a tourist map. The instructions were indeed located where the criminals had indicated and contained a brief explanation of exactly how the money should be transferred. First of all, the criminals did not insist that the bag of cash be handed over specifically by the company owner, which was very strange and, in my opinion, reckless. The police did not miss this mistake and took advantage of it by sending their undercover agent to the meeting. However, upon reading the note, it became clear that time was short and it was urgent to go to the Takatsuki railway station. The criminals chose a rather unusual way to transfer money. They were instructed to pack the money in a so-called Boston bag. The instructions included a ticket for an evening train, which specified a specific seat on the left side of the train, by the window. The train departed from Takatsuki Station at 8:35 p.m. and headed towards Kyoto. The money was to be thrown out of the window during the train ride as soon as the person making the transfer saw a white flag hanging from one of the buildings, as indicated by the criminals. It was already getting dark, and on top of that, June 28th was a gloomy, rainy day. Low, leaden clouds hung over the city, and visibility was extremely limited. It is still unclear whether the flag was actually hung by the criminals, as stated in the instruction. However, the police representative sent to the transfer could not see it, no matter how hard he looked out the window. Of course, more than one police officer was sent on this train. 7 members of the 1st Division, the highest level of the police, were also in the same car, keeping an eye on the situation. It was they who noticed a suspicious person closely watching the undercover police officer. It was clear that the strange passenger was not taking his eyes off what was happening, carefully noting every moment. He was noticeably nervous, which could be seen with the naked eye. It was this strange behavior that first drew the attention of the law enforcement officers to him. The strange passenger was obviously a Japanese man, approximately 45 years old, dressed in a fashionable light gray suit and wearing frameless Kamian glasses. Standing at a height of 178 centimeters, he was well built and gave the impression of a neat, toned, strong man. His dark hair was short and curly. The most remarkable feature of his appearance were his particularly narrow and slanting eyes, like those of a fox. This is how all the media and the police would later call him, the man with fox eyes. The police officer, who was playing the role of a representative of the Marudai company and did not see the secret signal from the criminals in the train, was forced to travel to the end station in Kyoto. Upon getting off the train, he tried to demonstrate the appropriate behavior for the occasion. He purchased a return ticket to Takatsuki and sat on a bench in the nearest square to wait for the train. The man with fox eyes did not leave his side and sat on a nearby bench, keeping his eyes fixed on the police officer. But the moment of departure came and the police officer had to leave Kyoto. However, for some reason, his shadow refused to continue following him. After ensuring that his target had boarded the train to Takatsuki, he turned around and walked towards a busy street, stopping at various shops and blending into the crowd. The police followed him and led him through several blocks. But the man with fox eyes, suddenly making a skillful maneuver, disappeared into the crowd, leaving the police with their noses in the air. Whether this person was just one of the gang members or the inspirer and organizer of all the actions of the 21-faced monster remains unknown. But the police would meet him again later. The police operation failed miserably, and the monster got a chance to continue its terror. Perhaps it was a trial attempt by the criminals, or more likely, someone was keeping an eye on the police and decided to cancel the operation. Either way, both sides ended up losing. The criminals did not get their money, and the police lost their chance to catch them. And so everyone had to keep working. The monster was constantly losing, not receiving a penny in the end. Its only achievement was widespread notoriety, which obviously played into its hands. But this beast did not want to stop there. On July 3, it sent another note to the director of the trading house of Marudai Company, instructing him to bring the previously mentioned amount to a restaurant in the city of Ibaraki by 20:0 on July 6. This operation was again approved by the police department, but it was decided to send only the director of the trading house to the meeting so as not to scare off the criminals. And so, at 20:0, sitting in the designated place, Fujita Masamitsu, the head of Marudai, waited for a call from the monster with a sum of 50 million yen. The call came at 27, and the voice recorded on tape was no longer a woman's, but a child's, dictating that further instructions for transferring the money could be found in a telephone booth near a bus stop in the Kamihozumi area of Ibaraki. At 9:12 p.m., disguised police officers searched the telephone booth and actually found a short note on the back of the bench in the waiting room at the Yamazaki bus stop, where the Ibaraki buses to Kyoto on the Meishin Highway depart. The criminals, like the mythical Nils with his flute, led the police behind them, making them do only what they wanted. The law enforcement officers had no choice but to dance to the tune of the villains, like enchanted rats. Now, after reading this note, they were forced to rush to the Yamazaki stop. Upon arrival at 9:29 p.m. in the waiting room, disappointment awaited the police. They found only the next note pointing in the direction of the bench at the Fukakusa stop. This stop was not in Ibaraki, but already in another city, Kyoto, and again, the investigators had to make up for lost time. The criminals were constantly several steps ahead, and it seemed that this pursuit was just a race for a laughing ghost. And again, a note that sent the police to the next destination. Rushing to the scene and already realizing that they were being fooled, the police found an empty canned food tin covered with a scrap of white fabric. But there were no more instructions. What the hell? What is all this for? And suddenly, through the radio, one of the agents reports that a man is hiding behind a nearby car and watching the police's action. As it turned out, they were being watched at this destination as well. And this observer was none other than our familiar man with the fox eyes. Realizing that he had been noticed, he straightened up, pulled his baseball cap down over his eyes, and, trying to pretend to be drunk, began to walk unsteadily towards the busy street. It was incredible. The rogue was trying to escape again, and suddenly, switching to a sprint, he, like a cunning fox, darted into the nearest alley and was gone. For several hours, the elusive puppet master pulled the strings, manipulating the actions of Japan's best detectives. But it had to be admitted once again, the 21-faced monster had skillfully outwitted the police, leaving them with nothing. One could only guess what the goal of such a convoluted operation was, as it was obvious the criminal did not plan to get money this time. He was probably just mocking and having fun. And a few days later, just like Glico, Marudai received forgiveness from the monster in the form of a frivolous note. "I forgive you guys.